I went into a keto diet. And as most people know, keto is 80% fat. It's very low carb. I was sub 8 net carbs a day, so it was very low carb. And I started losing weight, and I went to my traditional internist, and he wasn't super familiar with keto. So he said, I need you to do a calcium score. I was so shocked by what I saw in the calcium score. It scared the living hell out of me. I became panicked that I was going to have a heart attack and die. I would advise anybody who's had a calcium score that scares you to death that you need to try to do, I would, CIMT for your carotids and a CTA through Clearly with AI, and get the picture of where you really are. Because if it's bothering you, if it's keeping you up late, if you had a traditional doctor who said, oh, your LDL's over 100, you have to take a statin, here's a calcium score. Oh, my calcium score is horrible. I'm not the only person I'm sure that this has happened to.
So Dayna, it's great to have you on board. You've got a fantastic story, and it raises a whole lot of questions about things like calcium score, which is supposed to be the standard, or at least very easily standardized or very reliable number. Yours is maybe throwing question on that. The other thing that you have is you've got a couple of CIMTs, and in the end, you've gotten a CTA, a CT angiogram with AI analysis by Clearly. So this gives us in our audience a great opportunity to compare these three. And again, one of the reasons we had you on the channel was you start off with the upper 10% by calcium score in terms of risk. That's got to make you a little bit nervous. Over the next 2 years, your LDL goes over 400. So that would make folks like your doctor pretty nervous, I would think. And then you get two CIMTs, both of them showing minimal plaque, and then a CT angiogram showing minimal plaque, including no soft plaque. So tell us about this story.
Well, yeah, one thing I will lead with is that traditional medicine is not the answer. In my case, it certainly wasn't the answer. In 2019, I went on a change of eating, and I went into a keto diet. And as most people know, keto is 80% fat. It's very low carb. I was sub 8 net carbs a day, so it was very low carb. And I started losing weight, and I went to my traditional internist, who I had very high LDL at that point, probably I think it was 250-ish. And I tried to explain to him what I believed a lean mass hyperresponder was, which I fell into that category because I had found someone named Dave Feldman, who was sort of a citizen scientist. And I said, well, I'm a lean mass hyperresponder. And I said, you've got to give me some time to let this settle in. And he wasn't super familiar with keto. So he made me come back in 3 months, and it was still very elevated. So he said, I need you to do a calcium score. I said, fine. So I did a calcium score, which interestingly is not covered by insurance and is supposed to be the sort of the gold standard for docs, particularly when they have 15 minutes with you. And I was so shocked by what I saw in the calcium score. It scared the living hell out of me. It showed that I was in the top 10% of risk. One of my arteries, I believe, was 95% occluded. So I became panicked that I was going to have a heart attack and die, which has been a history in my family as well. So but I kept studying the lean mass hyperresponder. So he said, you really have to go on a statin. So I went on Lipitor, which I now know is probably not one of the best ones I could have gone on. And it made a difference, but not a lot. And despite those discussions with my doctor, I stayed the course. I continued to believe I was a lean mass hyperresponder, but in the back of my mind, I was fearful, and everything I did was fearful, was driven by that fear about potentially, it could be real. At that time, I also made a major change in lifestyle. I had been gluten and dairy free for some time at any rate, but I decided I did a deep dive on the importance of a number of things. I read a book called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. It is a life changer. I suggest everyone read it. And I found for me, and it's the evidence shows that a foundation for optimal health is solid, restorative, and restful sleep. And without that, for instance, 4 nights of bad sleep, your blood test will show you as pre-diabetic. It can have a significant impact on your health. So I began focusing on sleep. I got an Aura ring. I've been tracking it. I looked at my trends. And during this time on a parallel track, I started increasing my exercise. I always exercise a lot periodically, but I started focusing more on weekly performance. I changed my diet, although there wasn't a lot of change to be had, but I became very, very focused on healthy, clean food and no processed foods. The only thing I really had to stop eating was corn chips. I started, interestingly, with the Wheat Belly 10-day detox program. And my husband and I went on it. He, at the time, had been diagnosed as type 2 diabetic. In those 10 days of actually very good food, both our faces thinned. His blood numbers, sugar numbers went down dramatically. And we began on this path of paleo, staying keto, but staying away from grains or any foods that we learned or believed were inflammatory. And so as time goes along, I reached my weight goal. I dropped probably from 162 at my high down to 135, and noticed a difference in all areas. My LDL, although went up and down, even with the Lipitor, but I stayed on the keto course for quite some time into 21. And I met Dr. Brewer. I think I met you. I think I became a patient, and I believe it was 21. I'm not 100% sure. But I saw your YouTube. I saw you talk about reversing your plaque. And I said, here's a doctor that will understand what my issues are and how to fix them and what to do, because he goes to the root cause. He's not medicating the symptoms. So, and I started doing a lot of research into functional health. I also started a library of books. I became a voracious reader for David Sinclair, David Asprey. I started looking at all of the things that were involved in a healthy lifestyle and all of the research, and I read clinical studies, and I did a lot of testing. I also have what I call a functional nutritionist, and she is by far, she's got a PhD, and she has a whole functional clinic. And so we began testing things like food intolerances and IgG, which is important, I think, for people to understand. I would have days, even though I knew I had a dairy and a gluten issue, I would have days where I ate completely clean. I didn't eat anything I knew to be a problem for me, and I would be sick. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And I learned about IgG foods, which I just have retested. I'm waiting for the results. And what that means is you have a delay. You have antibodies produced in your body that your body starts to fight itself. And so eggs, which are in the top 5, various foods became known to me as I'd have a 2 to 3 day delay, and thus answer the question. So I've been on a path for 2 years now to clean out and figure out all of those things that create intolerances. And why did I do that? Well, eating makes bad food, or eating something I'm intolerant to, even with a delay, creates inflammation. And inflammation, in my mind, through everything I've studied, is inflammaging, which is that inflammation creates an aging, accelerated aging situation, which is not good for the cardiovascular system. It's not good for our brain. It's not good for anything. And so my LDL would go up and down. I started adding some carbs about late 21. And when I started adding some carbs and being less keto, my LDL came down considerably. And I said, okay, I think I'm correct in seeing that it is very much carb related. It's not, I don't believe it's a saturated fat issue. It's carb related. And so I thought that was very interesting, but it reinforced my belief that the lean mass hyperresponders, it's a low carb issue. And by this time, Dave Feldman was beginning to work with other folks, Nick Norowitz and some others, to try to put together funding to do a study, a clinical study, random controlled trial on lean mass hyperresponders. And those results, just jumping ahead a little bit, those results have shown a significant I said that they proved that they were in fact correct when compared to other folks. And it made me feel a lot better.
I'm going to interrupt just a second and say, because that's clearly your story with that LDL getting over 400, you're not putting it down new plaque. You're just not.
No. So yes, and to that point, but I was still living with some fear that, that calcium score I had in 2019 maybe was relevant, even though I'm really believing that I am a lean mass hyperresponder. Is it true, and unrelated, or is it true, and related? So at Dr. Brewer's prompting, I did a CIMT, a carotid intima medial thickness
test.
I think.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
it was very hard to find, but finally, eventually was able to find someone who could do that for me. And in my carotids, which I relate that to stroke, I relate heart to heart attack, may or may not be entirely true, but I was very concerned about plaque in my carotid arteries, which are here in our neck, and which can develop plaque and which can cause strokes. So it turned out I had as minimal as you can possibly get a plaque in my CIMT, and I had it redone in 23. What
And
started happening in 23, and by now I'm 100.
while you're there, I'll
Yeah.
just interrupt again real quick. To the point that you're making, there's about a 98% overlap. It's, as you know, it's usually, you've already referred to it, it's usually a metabolic issue. It's usually inflammation resulting, and usually, in most cases, resulting from aging and poor metabolism. And so it's not just a local thing. If you've got it in your neck, you've got a 98% probability of having it in your heart too. So that's part of what we're
Wow.
working.
Yeah,
But you
and
came in with that high calcium score. And
yeah.
your first visit with us, by the way, was November of 2020.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
that helps put some of the time frame in
Oh, it
perspective.
was even before 21. And the great thing is I didn't have to try to convince you. You understood finally. You understood. I found someone who understood what I was struggling with, what my issues were, what my belief system was. It was fighting with traditional medicine fighting hard. I argued with my internist quite a bit, respectfully, but I pushed him and beyond what he had in med school, and he has 15 minutes with the patient. So finding Dr. Ford was a brewer, was a, sorry, Dr. Ford a lot, was a breath of fresh
That's
air. And so I want to just emphasize that all along I am testing all sorts of things. I am adding, as I said, my sleep. I got my Aura ring, which gives me my trends and my REM and my deep and what impacts them. And if I can have a glass of wine, it has to be before 6 o'clock. And it's best not to because it impacts my REM. All of these things are important because it's all tied together in a system. And so what started happening was I entered in a period of a lot of stress. I lost a lot of weight. My numbers, oddly enough, my weight went down to 115, which was horribly low. I'm 5'8" in 21, but my numbers became amazingly good. But I have no interest in being that weight again. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. I wonder what it is. They talk about the people that are undereat, like the Loma Linda population, lots of walking and eating, and they're very thin all the time and they're cold. Well, I experienced all of that, but I knew I was not at a healthy weight. So I was trying to balance out where I needed to wind up, what weight was the best for me, on top of all the other things, the very reduced alcohol, the increased exercise, the continuing clean eating, the continuing to look at, I have leaky gut. I imagine I got it when I was eating gluten up until 2010, and I've been trying to close it. So I'm testing all the time to try to figure out what foods could potentially be a problem. And they switch all the time, which is crazy. But what's interesting.
Pardon the interruption, but before you get too far away, what the best weight for you is, I think it's worthwhile to know a little bit more about your early history. it's not like you're some uh, a little old lady. You've been a national class athlete,
Yeah.
sprinter, like Usain Bolt kind of. I mean, you didn't set those kind of records, but tell us a little bit more about that history. So, I
Sure.
mean, you have a lot of leg muscle, is the
I
point.
do have a lot of leg muscle. I started competing in track when I was about 8 years old in New Orleans, and wound up at a playground, which is how our Catholic schools had their athletic events. It wasn't through the schools. And I wound up, I was beating everyone, no track shoes, no real training. And a private club asked me to run in the Junior Olympics with them, which I did. Still had no spikes and no blocks that I'd been training with. I set a national record about 3 weeks after my 10th birthday. I tied with two girls in California. I made the newspapers. Everybody was called me the runner. They still do, the folks that are still around that remember me. And so I ran and I trained. I was asked to join a private girls track club, and we did. And it was extensive every summer in New Orleans, which was hell. Training, training, training. I played all sports in high school. I played everything: volleyball, basketball, baseball. I played tennis. I did everything I could. I grew up with three brothers. I grew up with nothing but boys in my neighborhood. None of them could beat me. And I absolutely loved it. And so that really set a foundation for me. It's interesting. I think childhood athletes develop I believe, in a different way than people who might get into athletic training and later in their life. I don't know if it's a switch that comes on. I don't know if we're built to just be different, but my opinion is that foundation drove me for years to stay in shape, to excel. I wasn't an over-exerciser. I didn't have to get up and run every morning. I was not a distance runner. I loved sprinting. And and then I began when I was 20 lifting weights with private trainers for a while. And throughout my life, I continued to do that. I continue to do it today. So I'm 65 and a half. I did have my biological age checked, and it was 49 and a half. And that was in June. So,
I'm
which
jealous.
puts me younger than my husband, who's 12 years younger than me. So that was a plus. Um, so he has
Dayna, if may I ask real quick, just going back to that previous life before the calcium score, because to me that kind of is like crossing the Rubicon. Is that how you say it, Dr. Brewer?
Yeah, crossing the Rubicon.
So you cross that, and it's like, oh man, I'm an athlete, I'm doing all this stuff, and I'm developing plaque. I'm gonna ask you a question that only doctors can get away with. So what was your highest weight back in the day?
162. Horrible.
162. So that was a BMI of 24-ish.
Yeah.
Have you ever, at that moment, did you ever test it for LDL cholesterol, glucose, any other, all that stuff? Were you a little like right now thinking about what was your blood work back in the day?
My LDL was not exceptionally high at all because my doctor, who I've been going to since 2015, by 2019, when what I would call hit the wall, and I will add that I had increased my alcohol. I was drinking more than I should. I wasn't drinking alcoholically, but I was drinking frequently. I grew up in New Orleans, and hopefully that mindset's sort of hard to get rid of. But I would say the one thing I was doing that was, and thus I wasn't exercising as much. I wasn't actually, I went spinning. I went to spin class in Highland Park, which is part of Dallas. Troy Aikman was in my class, so I went regularly. And but I couldn't move the needle. I couldn't drop a pound. My body wouldn't respond to it. So I had to then go back to basics. I had to go back to running. And I started running, got to 5 miles at a time, which was a lot for me. And the weight started coming off, and I noticed a difference. And then even though I knew that worked, I then met my now husband, and through the dating phase, and we were in 2 different states, and I was back in New Orleans while my son was at LSU. My weight went back up, and I got by 2019, I said, I can't do this anymore. I was buying size 12 clothes. I
That's
just,
what relationships do.
well, I called it love fat.
Yeah.
And I think you can have love fat for a little while, but not as long as you had it.
Yeah.
And I just, postmenopausal women, hello, guess what? It all goes in your,
Yes.
I was still thin, but I had a belly. And I said, boy, I could tell people I was pregnant, and it was the second coming of whatever. But that's when I went keto. And
Wonderful.
I knew, and I stopped drinking completely, and I went keto, and I reduced my carbs, and my LDL, that it shot back up. And that's the doctor putting me on, doing the calcium score. And so what I found in my exploration phase was carbs, 100%, plus carbs, reduced LDL, minus carbs, increased LDL. And so I finally said, when Dr. Brewer got me to do the CIMT, the first one, and then the second one, another thing happened that we still aren't really clear on what happened, but my ApoB started to go up. And that's the number that scares me. LDL doesn't scare me, but ApoB scares me. And so because of scariness in my head on the calcium score, I said to Dr. Brewer, I want to do CTA. I have to know what's going on.
So if you don't mind, I would like to walk through that journey, just kind of given that summary. So you are an athlete. You have always been an athlete. Then we can blame your husband and you gaining some weight.
Absolutely, on anything we can.
So went back to doing some running, going to keto, lose some weight. Your LDL goes up. Your doctor says, hey, let's get your calcium score. You get a calcium score of 169. Which for those who are familiar with it, it might not seem that high, but for your age and gender, it already places you on the 19th percentile, which is the top 10% of risk. So that's scary. It's like only 10% of women are in a higher danger than you are. It's like a heart attack sentence right there. Then Dr. Burr says, let's get you a CIMT, which we haven't talked too much about it. If you're new to the channel, you might need some perspective on this. It's an ultrasound in your neck, which will find out if you have plaque, like Dayna mentioned. And the CIMT, you had a couple of those. I have right here the one we're going to show on the screen, the one from March 2023. At age 63, your arterial age was 60 years old, arteries of somebody 3 years younger, and no significant plaque, which when you see that and you compare that with the calcium score, you start to wonder, well, who's right? So no significant plaque, which means you didn't have any plaque over 1.3 millimeters on the CIMT. And then new evidence starts coming out on the CT angiogram, and here comes a new company called Clearly, which now uses artificial intelligence information to tell you exactly how much plaque you have on your heart, right? And then I would like for us to go to that CT angiogram, because the difference between these 3 tests is the calcium score will tell you if you have calcium, but it will not tell you anything about soft plaque, which is the dangerous one, the one that causes heart attacks. CIMT can tell you about both, but your CIMT was clean as a whistle. Yeah. So we kept wondering what's going on. So you went ahead and did the CT angiogram. Before we show the results, what was your experience with it?
Well, I have to say it was a bit of a challenge, because you've got to get your heart rate down to a certain level, and they will not take you in that day if your heart rate is not, I can't remember what it was, had to be below. And so I think you guys called in metoprolol of some kind, and I guess a beta blocker, and I made the cut. And I went in, and the only difference between that and any other CT I had was you feel it in your heart. You feel very warm when the contrast starts going through your heart. It was quick. It was easy. The warmth was a little warmer than I was expecting. And then I was, but it was easy. I was so happy I did it. because I knew I'd finally have the best evidence possible of what my situation actually was after what, 5 years almost, long time
Yes,
since the cows.
that's right.
Well, 5 years, 5 years.
Yes. So 5 years after your doctors scared the hell out of you, telling you you're about to have a heart attack. We need to, did they ever recommended stents or only statins?
No, just statins, and it was 20 milligrams. It wasn't even, I don't think that's a very high dose. I was kind of surprised because I thought, should I go get, an angiogram done? What should I do? I wasn't seeing a cardiologist until I started seeing Dr. Brewer. And I have to say, it's heavy in my family. My mother had her first heart attack in her 40s. Her father died of his second heart attack in his 40s. My mother's still alive today, but probably because she's kind of mean. And she's 88. She has congestive heart failure. She's had TIA. She's had 2 or 3 heart attacks. She's had an aneurysm in her abdominal area. She had a brain aneurysm, which they caught prior to her killing her. She's been through the ringer, but she's still going, which is shocking. And so, I thought, well, God, if she can make it with all that crap, and she certainly did not live a healthy lifestyle for most of her life, although she did walk for years. And I think that's why she's alive. I 100% believe she got up at 4 o'clock every morning. She walked 4 miles on a track at a school, and then she went to work. She was a administrative assistant at the city attorney's office, and she did that for, I think, 10 years. And I believe that's the only reason, because it certainly is not anything else she did, that she is still alive. I think exercise has got to be part of your program, even if you're just walking. It doesn't matter. You got to get up and move.
Definitely.
So then the CTA comes out, and you guys analyze it for me. So I'll let you talk about that.
So on the CT angiogram, I'm showing here on this, we're showing on the screen the physician's report of it. And we can show some of the images as well. You have multiple arteries. The main ones, the right coronary artery, RCA, on the left side on the column. The left main artery and the LAD, the left anterior descending artery, and the CX, which is the circumflex artery, which are the main arteries on the heart that supply blood to the heart. Then you have 3 types of plaque that they measure the volume of those in millimeters. And it's not just the volume, but the type of plaque. So you see low density non-calcified plaque, which is the soft plaque, the soft, the squishy, inflamed, dangerous plaque. Then you have non-calcified plaque, and then you have calcified plaque. Calcified plaque is mostly it's basically a stable plaque. Non-calcified is kind of a halfway in the middle, a little bit more than halfway, more calcified than soft. And anytime you have low density non-calcified plaque, 4% or more blocking your blood flow, not even blocking, just present, 4% or more of your vessel diameter, that's a problem. And as you can see, for women 65 years old, 0 soft plaque, absolutely 0 soft, squishy, dangerous plaque, which is, it's a long way from you're going to have a heart attack to say, okay, you do have plaque, like most people who are age 60 or older, but all of this plaque is basically stable. It doesn't seem like we're talking about a high cardiovascular risk. Completely different setting. And it comes to show how our friend Dave Feldman was right all along. You have mentioned lean mass hyperresponder a few times. And just for those who are not familiar with the term, lean mass hyperresponders, it's what we call a phenotype, which is an expression of a genetic pool. And these people have a different way of metabolizing carbohydrates and lipids. It all starts with a story similar to Dayna's, where you go into a low-carb ketogenic diet, and suddenly you realize your LDL cholesterol goes up to 200 or more. But your HDL is usually high. The clear definition is 80 or more, and your triglycerides go below 70. And even though lean mass is kind of in the title, it's not part of the criteria. We just came to see that most people who have these type of biomarkers are usually thin people. So Dave, on the keto trial that was just published, he examined 100 people with this phenotype. They were not building more plaque, despite their LDL levels being above 200, 300. So, Dr. Brewer, any remarks on that summary that I just gave?
Yeah, a couple of things. So, number one, she did have some plaque. So, in the beginning, when you had the calcium score and the CIMT at war with each other, this one came out and sort of split it down the middle. But it more than anything else, and it's like Dayna said in the very beginning, she's very glad she got it. It was really clear she's not in danger of a heart attack. She's got zero plaque. I mean, zero soft plaque, zero dangerous plaque. And the stuff that she's been doing is has been very helpful. You know, you talked about that moment when you started gaining weight. It reminds me of the quote from the book by Gary Taubes. He said, you know, we reach a time as we get middle-aged where we start to gain weight. And most people think it's because we're eating more. The reality is we're eating more because we're gaining weight. And that sounds kind of goofy, but here's what's happening. We're probably starting our insulin resistance journey. So we get to where we can't burn our carbs as well. Our insulin goes up. And what most people, including doctors, don't know is that high insulin stops us from burning fat too. So now all of a sudden we can't burn either of our major fuels. So what do you do for that? You stop eating carbs because fats are not going to stimulate your insulin. And then your insulin comes down, you can start losing weight, you start doing better. Your health improves.
I'm about to go back to the zero carb life for a while.
Yeah. So you did, go ahead.
Well, as I said, I started, the weight started coming back and my insulin numbers moved around. They're different every time. My LDL is different every time. What I did want to point out, there's something that you and Jesus said last time we had our call reviewing my blood work, was that let me go back a little. When my ApoB went up, and I started freaking out. Everybody probably knows who Peter Attia is. I call him Dr. Tortilla. He's all about ApoB, ApoB, ApoB. And so that freaked me out a bit.
Yeah.
So we worked to get me on Repatha, which is a miracle drug. Very hard to get. I had to start with a preliminary statin before they allowed me to try that. So I was on it in my last blood work. I believe my LDL prior to that was prior to the Repatha, and I'd only had 4 doses, was probably in the high threes, somewhere at 350 plus. Then in October, it came down to 149 or 147. My ApoB had gone as high as 2 something and was down to 116, 120, something like that. And what was interesting to me, which I'd never heard before, and maybe you guys could talk about it a little bit because I find it interesting, is Jesus said, hey, look at Dayna's, I think my LDL was 149, 147, but my PLA, what is that test? PLA-C2, plaque 2?
LPPLA2.
2
Yeah.
was green. I think it was healthy, which Jesus pointed out is I have a higher threshold I have a better threshold for a higher LDL number, which I had not heard before. And think you said it was higher than, I don't know, you mentioned somebody, but
Dr. Brewers.
That was curious.
Dr. Brewer, whenever
Dr. Brewer, yeah, I wasn't going to Dustin, but
if his LDL, if Dr. Brewer's LDL goes to 120, we can see some inflammation on that specific biomarker. We'll put it on the screen, LPPLA2, which is a substance that is, it's a lipase and enzyme activity, which is pretty much associated with LDL. They go hand by hand, just like LDL goes with ApoB. Similarly, when LDL gets oxidized, these LPPLA2 numbers starts going up. And Dr. Brewer, we have seen on his labs, whenever his LDL goes somewhere closer to 120, that LPPLA2 starts to creep up. In your case, we were looking at some of the previous lab numbers. At some moment, you had 180, your LPPLA2 was 137. On the last lab, your LDL was 149, your LPPLA2 was 114. The threshold is 123. So it's somewhere between 149 to 188 where your threshold is as we see it. So and even though you might have your LDL way above what the guideline says, that should be no more than 70.
Exactly. That's
It
the
doesn't
point.
it doesn't seem that you're developing that much inflammation. So that's kind of the conversation. Although your ApoB, I believe it was something like you said, 118. And we know ApoB is associated with cardiovascular risk. There's no doubt about that, but you have to see the full picture.
Well, and my ApoB had been 90, 93, 90, 93. It stayed right at a number that we were comfortable with. But so that's why I was concerned. I have no idea why it went up other than that's my body. But the LDL threshold is a concept that I think a lot of people don't know. And I'm not sure it means a lot right now, but to me, it was a brand new piece of information, which goes again to not the lean mass hyperresponder necessarily. Maybe it does, but it goes to your physician saying your LDL needs to be below 100 for everybody. We are all different. My LDL can be higher than Dr. Brewer's LDL, and we can both still have low or no inflammation. And so doing this targeted testing for me has been sort of creating the user manual on what works and what doesn't work and where to make adjustments. I will also add that, you know, you related to it a bit, Jesus, but the lifestyle, I have no doubt, and to reinforce that opinion, when you have leaky gut, it's a little off the beaten track, but when you have leaky gut, and you know, things get into your body that aren't supposed to be there, and traditionally that is the underlying cause of autoimmune disease. Everybody with an autoimmune disease tends to have a leaky gut. I apologize about that. Things. So the lifestyle and the leaky gut, one of my tests I had in June showed that I had an ANA, an anti-nuclear antibody, which is a autoimmune issue, which showed I could potentially have lupus, which I thought was insane because I have no symptoms of that. I had my functional nutritionist run a complete panel, 100% panel on all autoimmune diseases. And despite the fact that I have had leaky gut for probably 14 years now, I have zero autoimmune issues coming up anywhere. So, you know, the average person who doesn't have the lifestyle and isn't taking care of themselves and isn't looking at trends in their body and isn't looking at targeted diagnostics period, is going to have, you know, Hashimoto's, is going to have all sorts of autoimmune issues potentially. So all this is to say that the main driver for me is my LDL, and now I'm so comfortable after the CTA, and I would advise anybody who's had a calcium score that scares you to death that you need to try to do I would CIMT for your carotids and a CTA through Clearly with AI and get the picture of where you really are. Because if it's bothering you, if it's keeping you up late, if you had a traditional doctor who said, oh, your LDL's over 100, you have to take a statin, here's a calcium score. Oh, my calcium score is horrible. I'm not the only person I'm sure that this has happened to. And it's been kind of hanging over my head fairly heavily. And I am so relieved now. Now I've got the ApoB to deal with, but I feel confident that that's now an isolated issue. I'm comfortable on the LDL side that, you know, and the Repatha is knocking my numbers. It took my LDL when I started it in, I think, August, I think we did lab work. No, June, whatever it was 350, 347, something like that. And within 3 months and 4 shots of Repatha, I came down to 149, which is huge, even though I personally don't care what my LDL does, as long as my triglycerides stay low and my HDL stays high and I stay within the parameters of a lean mass hyperresponder. And I'm quarterly looking at my deep dives on my blood work for cardiovascular issues, and now understand very clearly the insulin component of that. And my insulin's been moving around because, you know, I'm not low carb. I believe I have to stay very low carb, like sub 10 carbs a day, maybe sub 20. And if I don't, I'm going to see weight gain. And I mean, you just have to learn what your body reacts to, and you have to learn what your touch points are. And, you know, and I think it's an important lesson for people to know that you can't just rely on blood work. You can't just rely on, you know, what your scale says or how your clothes fit. You have to understand how all of this works. And you'll, trust me, you'll be happier, calmer. You'll feel like you have some impact on your life and your lifestyle and your weight and all of these other things that you probably feel helpless about. And I mean, I feel like I've got a new lease on life when I had the CTA with AI. Just, oh my God. I think you all told me I was the best one in your clinic. I believe.
That's for sure. Until Dr. Bird gets his, and I think you're gonna beat him. Yours is gonna be better than Dr. Bird's.
think so.
I mean, he's eating all that ice cream
That's
twice a week.
right.
And even with your insulin, I mean, the insulin numbers, Dr. Brewer likes to see the fasting insulin below 5. I'm seeing your results, and we can show those on the screen real quick. It has gone from 5, 6, 4, 9, 7. Even those numbers, even if some of them are not below 5, those are much better than the average folk who will have 11, 15, 20, even 40 levels of fasting insulin, which are consistently causing inflammation in the vessels. And that's
Right.
not something that we see here, even with some insulin a little bit above 5. So
Well, I would,
yeah.
now I was going to say, I think that's twofold. One is doing this blood work and making, you know, changes, subtle changes, you know, tweaking my daily routines, my diet, etc. The other one is I'm a strong believer in the omega index and your omega numbers. And I score like I'm Japanese, which is as high as you can. I mean, that's like world class. And I 100% believe that between all of that, between the checking my numbers and doing a targeted focus on my specific numbers, and then having to make sure I get the omegas, and I supplement, but I also eat a lot of high omega foods. I think that you have to do that as well. And that's one of the things that you need to learn. I promise you, if you start doing that, because I had you guys check it for me, even though I had done one previously as well, but I wanted to check it to make sure I'm still scoring high. Anything related to inflammation is going to drive your aging. It's going to drive your metabolic issues. It's going to drive your, you know, the health of your brain, your gut and your brain, or as everyone, well, not everyone knows, but I'm a strong believer in the gut microbiome is connected to the brain, to the vagus nerve. I do vagus stimulation work. And now I'm moving into the oral microbiome world, to going to see a functional dentist, which ought to be fascinating. So my strongest recommendation is that you need to see your numbers. Don't be afraid of them. Don't ignore them. Don't deny symptoms. Don't let your weight go up 10 pounds a year. You know, start understanding what you need to do for your specific phenotype, for your specific body, and how your blood work and how your diet and how your lifestyle and your activity, physical activity, which is 100% a part of it, all tie together. And I may go overboard a bit because I do test almost everything, but that's just in my nature. And it's good to know. But I still say, what does this mean? What does this mean? Obviously, I'm not a doctor. This is so helpful. The quarterly reviews we do. And, you know, I move all over the place all the time. And I think that's just my norm. I need to quit stressing about it. It just is what it is.
Well, just remember, stress can cause inflammation. So that's another item to take care of.
Then you do breathing exercises.
So can you give the audience, like, I mean, this doesn't mean that what works for you is going to work for everybody. That's part of the journey. looking forward to
Yes.
what's the stuff that is bothering you and what you need to work on. But we have mentioned lifestyle several times. What
Yes.
works for Dayna Stewart? What's your day like in regards to your exercise routine and what you eat?
Well, hopefully it starts with waking up from a restorative night's sleep. That means deep and that means REM. And I won't go into all the things around deep sleep, but let's just say you have a car wash in your brain that washes out all the things called the lymphatic system. You should look it up. And that's why you need to have deep sleep. And as you get older, this reduces. So you really should track your sleep with a fairly accurate way, not with maybe a phone app, but maybe an Aura ring. So I get up and I go get sunlight in my eyes. I'm big on circadian rhythm. I go outside. I'm lucky enough to have the sunrise right off my east porch, and I step into the grass barefoot and I ground, which has been enormously helpful for me. All this stuff may sound woo-woo, but it's all real. And within the first, after about an hour of being up and doing various things around the house, I start exercising. I'm doing a lot of rebounding, which is a mini trampoline because I'm now working on my lymphatic drainage, which is a very important, that's your immune system. That's not your blood and, water. It's this whole other system in your body that's super important. So I work on that, and then I'm now very much into weights, heavy weights as I can, upper to lower, every part of my body. Because what I worry about is if I break a leg, if I have some sickness that puts me in bed, sarcopenia, which is your muscle reducing. It's just a normal process as you get older. I need extra muscle. We all need extra muscle so that we can get through that and still be upright and be comfortable and get ourselves back. It's hard to put on muscle as you get older, but I have been doing it. And so that to me is a great way to sort of start my day. I intermittent fast most days. I generally 16-8, sometimes a little longer. So I'll start with high protein, whether it's bacon and eggs, or I'll do a double scoop protein shake with blueberries and an avocado in it. I try to get a lot of good fats, and then I don't eat again until dinner. Dinner is always fresh vegetables. I am I'm meat forward. I am a carnivore type person, so I love my red meat, but I do eat a lot of cold water fish, salmon, etc., for the omegas, and I do like it a lot. And I have a whole 3-hour process that I go through for my sleep, which is I put on light blue blockers, probably around 5 or 6. I watch the news, I watch some television. At 8 o'clock, I put on my red blue blockers. I go into my room, I turn the air down to 66 because you really sleep better when the room is cold. You can have blankets on you, but your environment needs to be cold, blacked out as much as possible. I use an eye mask. I know that 3 hours before bed, I have to do, an hour before I go to sleep, I'm now just doing some deep breathing exercises, 4-7-8, or the physiological sigh. You can find all that with Andrew Huberman or Wim Hof in some cases. I also, some days will do saunas for heat shock proteins, because that's really good. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I take sometimes cold showers, which are very hard. You need 11 minutes a week from the clinical studies. Cold and hot are very good for you. I also try to get evening sunlight. So the morning sunlight is blue light, and it tells your brain, which is through your eyes, which is the external part of your brain, that it's morning, and your cortisol starts going up, your melatonin goes down, your body starts a clock for your melatonin to come in at night. And if you can get the sunset rays, do not look directly into the sun. You've got orange and red rays that I'm telling you makes a difference in helping me sleep. And the breathing just helps me get my body where it needs to be. I do a little vagus nerve work, which I won't go into all of that, but there's a lot of things you can do. And the last half hour before I go to sleep, and I do the Andrew Huberman protocol with the L-theanine, the magnesium 3 and 8, the apigenin, are very helpful in helping sleep. And they're supplements, so you don't have to take drugs. And that's really my perfect day. When I travel, it's a little harder because you have city noises, city lights, you've got, hotel rooms are noisy. So you got to get a lot of restorative sleep while you can and have as dark a room as possible. And so that's my focus, is making sure I get exercise, making sure that I get the sunlight in the morning, that my circadian rhythm is on track. I do a lot of that. The grounding is something new. I thought it was a little woo-woo for a while, but I'm a firm believer in it. And I believe it also helps keep your blood thin, uh, from a cardiovascular perspective. And I think that that's, how you start your day healthy, and you do everything you can with intention. It doesn't have to be obsessive, but think about, have I exercised? Have I gotten my morning light? If it's raining, you have to be out there a little longer. And I'm not saying I do that all the time. You have to think about what you're putting in your system, and all of that impacts everything, your blood work, your aging. I work real hard to try not to look my age. And sometimes, I have a pretty good day. I mean, right now I have allergy eyes, but it's, we all have some narcissism, us ladies especially. So I don't have fillers in my face. I haven't had any cosmetic surgery.
Oh,
I'm really, I
you
think.
have to ask Dr. Brewer about that.
He's telling me I need to get fillers or something. I got these bags since I got older.
You got to get, I do too. They're not as pronounced as you, but
Well, thanks.
you have to get a bleph. I am going to do my eyes. I absolutely am, because that is something you can't really stop from happening. And given that I have a young husband 12 years younger than me, I think, although I do look younger than him.
There you
But
go.
all of this is, and everything is driven by, what I see in my next quarterly blood work, what I see when I do my next IgG, IgA testing. Am I doing everything I'm supposed to do? Yes, I have days where I don't do much of anything, but for the most part, as you get older, I hate to say it, and it irritates me to no end. I've thrown down the gauntlet. I've quit fighting it. I can't skip exercise. I can't skip these healthy lifestyle things. I don't get do-overs anymore like I did in my 30s, 40s, and even 50s.
Yeah.
I can see the difference, and it shows in my numbers. So all I can say to folks is do everything you can to live healthy, and do the work you need to do to understand what your specific body responds to. And there are ways to be better, to age less, to feel healthier, to be happier. Lack of sleep causes enormous anxiety. So there's another good reason to sleep. We all seem to be walking around with anxiety. And it wasn't for Dr. Brewer and Jesus and the team helping me to really see what's going on, and allowing me to say, you know what, my insulin was high this month because I have trigger finger in both hands, and the inflammation was terrible. And so my CRP went to, 1.3 from 0.3. And that's what it is. And that's why my insulin went up, because your muscles absorb glucose. Without building muscle, it's going to cause all those numbers to go up. And just be patient, but really look into it and be intentional, because it doesn't happen by.
Do you have something with which do you treat yourself with something? Dr. Brewer likes ice cream. I think I can go to the movies and not eat some popcorn.
Why can't eat popcorn?
What's your poison?
Well, I hate to tell you, but I since I can't eat gluten and dairy, it's very limited. My dessert are two things. I make a killer triple layer chocolate cake. Everything's homemade with no gluten, no grains, no dairy, no sugar. It's actually, I've got one sitting over there now. But what I go to generally at night that I call my dessert is Perfect Keto makes a bar I think it's called salted caramel or something. And, it's 9 grams of protein and 3 net grams of carbs, but it just gives me that feeling like I've had some dessert. That, or oddly enough, goat cheese, mozzarella or cheddar goat cheese.
Yeah,
because it's
and the whole point was that because you are one of our, I like to call top 1% patients. Like, that statistic, like only about less than 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy. And the way we see your progress, we can absolutely say that you're on the top 1%. But that doesn't mean that your life has to be revolving around limiting yourself on not doing anything. Like
Yeah.
if you can still treat yourself with something, the whole point is that you not get derailed by that, and your life
Absolutely.
goes around just treating yourself and getting into obesity and diabetes and cardiovascular plaque and end up having a heart attack. There's a balance to be made.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I overtest and I've given up so much, but I don't. I think about how I feel, and I think about a long health span, and you know, honestly, that keto bar gives me great. I've been getting them for years, and it's sweet enough that it's not sugar, but I feel like it's something that's kind of a treat. And every once in a while, I have a glass of red wine, and I don't care if they say you shouldn't have a drink. I have I dry farm wine only. It's no sugar and low carbs, but it's very good. European wine, dryfarmwines.com. I highly recommend you look at that. And I've stopped a lot of the partying
Are they paying
behavior.
you?
Yeah.
They should. But you know, a lot of influence that I found out because Mark Sisson and other influencers have talked about it. I'm like, so I try it, and it's not inexpensive, but it's I know because of my aura ring and because of my sleep, I can have the wine. And my husband really doesn't drink at all, and I just whatever, I'm going to have my own, and that is a treat to me. I get very excited about having a glass of wine. I do it a couple times a week, and you know, I allow myself to it. I don't care if they say you shouldn't drink at all. I'm going to have a couple glasses of wine a week. That's it. I'm going to treat myself. Thank you for asking that, Jesus, because that is, you know, I get it, but I am so disciplined, probably more so than I should be.
Yes.
But that's what's worked for me. I mean, again,
Yes.
you know, we're individuals, and other people, you know, the guy that lives till 95 and drinks and smokes cigars every day, right? You're like, what the hell? How did he do that? Well, he's very different than I am. And so everybody's got to figure out who they are. And I think you have to do a little bit of testing to figure that out. And then you have to make some decisions around saying, okay, what do I need to do in all of these areas? Sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress, and your medical evaluations. Do not, you know, there were a lot of times I was afraid to know. I didn't want to know. I just didn't want to even think about what it was. And I pushed that away, and I just go at it head first and say, okay, good Lord, what happened to my ApoB? What's going on? We still don't really know. Don't know if we'll ever know. I know the Repatha is bringing it down. I expect my next blood work to be even more improved. And that's all I can do is try.
Yeah.
And not
Dayna, you've referred to that, what some lipidologists might have called LDL discordance. And to speak to that, there's some people that are probably wondering about your remnant cholesterol. Do you mind if I mention it and say what it
no,
was?
go ahead, because I forget.
It's been less than 20 from day one. And so that's the cut point that most people look for a high remnant. And that's the big difference between LDL and ApoB, your remnant cholesterols, those larger particles that really are associated with plaque. The IDL, VLDL, those large, fluffy, full of triglyceride kind of particles. The other thing I'll say for those technical people that are sitting there listening to you and wondering, they're also probably wondering what your triglyceride and HDL were. And I'll share that as well. It was what, 88 and 78. So again, really good numbers.
Yep.
Yeah, and my triglycerides have gone up a little bit, and I'll bet when I go low carb, they're going to go down, and my HDL is going to go up.
Yep.
I am so sensitive to carbs.
This 88 triglyceride and 78 HDL are some of your poorest numbers because you're eating a little bit of carbs right now.
And then that ratio, right? LDL to
Yeah.
HDL. That's
So
something,
even now that ratio is just over 1 triglyceride over HDL,
which is good.
which is a major target for most people.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to add something, Dr. Brewer? We're getting closer to the finish line.
Yes. So, something for the non-technical people. The non-technical people, if you've made it this far, you might have gotten lost. Let me go back and summarize for you.
Thank you.
Wow. Grab a chair.
The reason the reason that Dayna's case is so interesting is, well, no, there's several different components, but the most important one was she had a high calcium score and then a very high LDL, quote, bad cholesterol going over 400. But then her CIMT really did not look that bad, ×2. And then we got what's currently the definitive study for this. And there's not very, as at one point there was, Jesus made a comment of very little risk for a 65-year-old lady. I would say very little risk, period. There is 0 soft plaque in there. So it says a couple of things. Number one, the calcium score, as we've said multiple times, is not always the whole story. Number two, a CIMT can be helpful. Number three, and most importantly, having an LDL over 400 in some situations is not really that bad of a thing. So
Hallelujah.
I'm glad you feel better.
Thank you.
That
I do.
was our goal in number one, to get you, make sure you were better. We thought you were better from the beginning, but to also make you feel better yourself.
Don't feel bad,
Well-
Dayna. You're not the first person who hears Dr. Brewer and doesn't believe him. You need to see the numbers and then, oh, okay, Dr. Brewer was right.
Well, I
Yes,
think
yes.
I think he probably wondered why I was always so like this. I was so stressed about what do these mean? What do these mean? Because I had the calcium score in the back of my mind, and honestly, no
And
one.
the family history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Jesus, anything else from you?
Just for the audience, if you made it this far, thank you so much. If you're still wondering what's that about the CT angiogram, CIMT, calcium score, we're gonna put a video right at the end of this conversation, so you can click on that and take a closer look to all of that. And we can also put a link to Dr. Brewer's plaque reversal story, so you have even more information if this is the first time you're seeing this. We like to put a highlight on our patients who wants to share their story, because their story might be pretty much similar to yours, and we want to put that out there. So thank you so much, Dayna.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.